Welcome back. We're on to chapter 19. We find out the truth, sort of. So here they are in the underworld. Imagine the largest concert crowd you've ever seen, a football field packed with 1 million fans. That'd be crazy. Now imagine a field 1 million times that big, packed with people, and imagine the electricity has gone out, and there's no noise, no light, no beach ball bouncing around over the crowd. Something tragic has happened backstage. Whispering masses of people are just milling around in the shadows, waiting for the concert that will never start. If you can picture that, you have a pretty good idea of what the fields of Asphodel look like. The black grass had been trampled by eons of dead feet. A warm, moist wind blew like the breath of a swamp. Black trees, Grover told me they were poplars, grew in clumps here and there. The cavern ceiling was so high above us that it might have been a black or a bank of storm clouds, except for the stalactites, which glowed faintly gray and looked wickedly pointed. I tried not to imagine they'd fall on us at any moment, but dotted around the fields were several that had fallen and had impaled themselves in the black grass, kind of like Olaf. I guess the dead didn't have to worry about little hazards, like being speared by stalactites the size of booster rockets. Annabeth, Grover, and I tried to blend into the crowd, keeping an eye out for security ghouls. I couldn't help looking for familiar faces among the spirits of the asphodel, but the dead are hard to look at. They'll come up to you and speak, but their voices sound like chatter, like bats twittering. Once they realize you can't understand them, they frown and move away. The dead aren't scary, they're just sad. We crept along, following the line of new arrivals that snaked from the main gates toward a black tented pavilion with a banner that read, Judgments for Elysium and Eternal Damnation. Welcome, newly deceased. Out of the back tent came two much smaller lines. To the left, spirits flanked by the security ghouls were marched down a rocky path toward the fields of punishment, which glowed and smoked in the distance, a vast cracked wasteland with rivers of lava and minefields and miles of barbed wire, separating the different torture areas. Even from far away, I could see people being chased by hellhounds, burned at the stake, forced to run naked through cactus patches, and listen to opera music. That's torture. I could just make out a tiny hill with the ant-sized figure of Sisyphus struggling to move his boulder to the top. And I saw worse tortures too. Things I don't want to describe. The line coming from the right side of Judgment Pavilion was much better. This one led down a small valley surrounded by walls, a gated community, which seemed to be the only happy part of the underworld. Beyond the security gate were neighborhoods of beautiful houses from every time period of history. Roman villas, and medieval castles and Victorian mansions. Silver and gold flowers bloomed on the lawns, the grass rippled in rainbow colors. I could hear laughter and smell barbecue cooking. Elysium. In the middle of the valley was a glittering blue lake, with three small islands like a vacation resort in the Bahamas. The Isles of the Blessed, for people who had chosen to be reborn 3 times, and 3 times achieved Elysium. Immediately I knew that's where I want to go when I died. That's what it's all about, Annabeth said, like she was reading my thoughts. That's the place for heroes. But I thought of how few people were in Elysium, how tiny it was compared to the fields of Asphodel or even the fields of punishment. So few people did good in their lives. It was depressing. We left the Judgment Pavilion and moved deeper into the Asphodel fields. It got darker. The colors faded from our clothes, the crowd of chattering spirits began to thin. After a few miles of walking, we began to hear a familiar screech in the distance. Looming on the horizon was a palace of glittering black obsidian. I bet you guys know what this is. Above the parapets swirled 3 dark bat-like creatures, the Furies. I got the feeling they were waiting for us. I suppose it's too late to turn back? Grover said wistfully. We'll be okay. I tried to sound confident. Maybe we should search some of the other places first, Grover suggested, like Elysium, for instance. Come on, goat boy, Annabeth grabbed his arm. Grover yelped. His sneakers sprouted wings and his legs shot forward, pulling him away from Annabeth. He landed flat on his back in the grass. Grover, Annabeth chided. Stop messing around. But I didn't. He yelped again. His shoes were flapping like crazy now. This isn't good. They levitated off the ground and started dragging him away from us. Maya! He yelled. But the magic words seemed to have no effect. Maya already! 911! Help! I got over being stunned and made a grab for Grover's hand, but too late. He was picking up speed, skidding downhill like a bobsled. We ran after him. Annabeth shouted, "Untie the shoes!" It was a smart idea, but I guess it's not so easy when her shoes are pulling you along feet first at full speed. Grover tried to sit up, but he couldn't get close to the laces. We kept after him, trying to keep him in sight as he zipped between the legs of the spirits who chattered at him in annoyance. I was sure Grover was going to barrel straight through the gates of Hades' palace, but his shoes veered sharply to the right and dragged him in the opposite direction. The slope got steeper. Grover picked up speed. Annabeth and I had to sprint to keep up. The cavern walls narrowed on either side, and I realized we'd entered some kind of side tunnel. No black grass or trees now, just rock underfoot, in the dim light of the stalactites above. "Grover!" I yelled, my voice echoing. "Hold on to something!" "What? What? He yelled back. He is grabbing at gravel, but there was nothing big enough to slow him down. The tunnel got darker and colder. The hairs on my arms bristled. It smelled evil down here. It made me think of things I shouldn't even know about. Blood spilled on an ancient stone altar, the foul breath of a murderer. Then I saw what was ahead of us, and I stopped dead in my tracks. What do you think it is? I had no idea when I read this the first time. The tunnel widened into a huge dark cavern, and in the middle was a chasm the size of a city block. Grover was sliding straight toward the edge. "Come on, Percy!" Annabeth yelled, nudging or tugging at my wrist. "But that's—" "I know!" she shouted. "The place you described in your dream. But Grover's going to fall if we don't catch him." She was right, of course. Grover's predicament got me moving again. He was yelling, clawing at the ground, but the winged shoes kept dragging him toward the pit, and it didn't look like we could ever possibly get to him in time. What saved him were his hooves. The flying sneakers had always been a loose fit on him, and finally Grover hit a big rock and the left shoe came flying off. It sped into the darkness, down into the chasm. The right shoe kept tugging him along, but not as fast. Grover was able to slow himself down by grabbing onto the big rock and using it like an anchor. He was 10 feet from the edge of the pit when we caught him and hauled him back to the slope. The other winged shoe tugged itself off, circled around angrily, kicked our heads in protest before flying off into the chasm to join its twin. They saved him just in time. We all collapsed exhausted on the obsidian gravel. My limbs felt like lead. Even my backpack seemed heavier. It's as if somebody had filled it with rocks. Grover was scratched up pretty bad. His hands were bleeding. His eyes had gone slit-pupiled, goat style, the way they did whenever he was terrified. "I don't know," he panted. I didn't." "Wait," I said. "Listen." I heard something, a deep whisper in the darkness. Another few seconds, and Annabeth said, "Percy, this place—" "Shh," I stood. The sound was getting louder, a muttering evil voice from far, far below us, coming from the pit. Grover sat up. What's that noise?" Annabeth heard it too now. I could see it in her eyes. Tartarus. The entrance to Tartarus. That's where a really deep pit is. That's where Kronos and the Titans are right now. I uncapped Onkelusmus, or Riptide, as he has his sword. The bronze sword expanded, gleaming in the darkness, and the evil voice seemed to falter just for a moment before resuming its chant. I could almost make out words now, ancient words, older even than Greek, as if— "Magic," I said. "We have to get out of here," Annabeth said. Together we dragged Grover to his hooves and started back up the tunnel. My legs wouldn't move fast enough. My backpack weighed me down. The voice got louder and angrier behind us, and we broke into a run. Not a moment too soon. A cold blast of wind pulled at our backs, as if the entire pit were inhaling. For a terrifying moment, I lost ground, my feet slipping into the gravel. If we'd been any closer to the edge, we would have been sucked in. We kept struggling forward and finally reached the top of the tunnel, where the cavern widened into the fields of asphodel. The wind died. A wail of outrage echoed from deep in the tunnel. Something was not happy we'd gotten away. "What was that?" Grover panted, and we collapsed in the relative safety of a black poplar grove. "One of Hades' pets?" Annabeth and I looked at each other. I could tell she was nursing an idea, probably the same one she'd gotten during the taxi ride to L.A., but she was too scared to share it. That was enough to terrify me. I capped my sword and put the pen back in my pocket. Let's keep going, I looked at Grover. Can you walk? He swallowed. Yeah, sure, I never liked those shoes anyway. He tried to sound brave about it, but he was trembling as badly as Annabeth and I were. Whatever was in that pit was nobody's pet. It was unspeakably old and powerful. Even Echidna hadn't given me that feeling. I was almost relieved to turn my back on the tunnel and head toward the palace of Hades. Almost. The Furies circled the parapets high in the gloom. The outer wall of the fortress glittered black, and the two-story bronze gates stood wide open. Up close I saw some of the engravings on the gates were scenes of death. Some were from modern times, an atomic bomb exploding over a city, a trench filled with gas mask-wearing soldiers, a line of African famine victims waiting with empty bowls. But all of them looked as if they'd been etched into the bronze thousands of years ago. I wondered if I was looking at prophecies that had come true. Inside the courtyard was the strangest garden I've ever seen. Multicolored mushrooms, poisonous shrubs, and weird luminous plants grew without sunlight. Precious jewels made up for the lack of flowers, piles of rubies as big as my fist, clumps of raw diamonds, standing here and there like frozen party guests were Medusa's garden statues. Petrified children, satyrs, and centaurs, all smiling grotesquely. In the center of the garden was an orchard of pomegranate trees, with their orange blooms neon bright in the dark. The garden of Persephone, Annabeth said. Keep walking. I understood why she wanted to move on. The tart smell of those pomegranates was almost overwhelming. I had a sudden desire to eat them, but then I remembered the story of Persephone. One bite of underworld food, and we would never be able to leave. I pulled Grover away to keep him from picking up a big, juicy one. We walked up the steps of the palace between black columns through a black marble portico and into the house of Hades. The entry hall had a polished bronze floor which seemed to boil in the reflected torchlight. There was no ceiling, just the cavern roof far above. I guess they never had to worry about rain down here. Every side doorway was guarded by the skeleton in military gear. Some wore Greek armor, some British redcoat uniforms, some camouflage with tattered American flags on the shoulders. They carried spears or muskets or M16s. None of them bothered us, but their hollow eye sockets followed us as we walked down the hall, toward the big set of doors at the opposite side. 2 U.S. Marine skeletons guarded the doors. They grinned down at us, rocket-propelled grenade launchers held across their chests. You know, Grover mumbled, I bet Hades doesn't have trouble with door-to-door salesmen. I like their humor in these really bad moments. My backpack weighed a ton now. I couldn't figure out why. I wanted to open it to check to see if I had somehow picked up a stray bowling ball. But this wasn't the time. Well, guys, I said, I suppose we should knock. A hot wind blew down the corridor and the doors swung open. The guard stepped aside. I guess that means entrez-vous, Annabeth said. The room inside looked just like in my dream, except this time the throne of Hades was occupied. He was the third god I'd met, but the first one who really struck me as godlike. He was at least 10 feet tall, for one thing, and dressed in black silk robes and a crown of braided gold. His skin was albino white, his hair shoulder length and jet black. He wasn't bulked up like Ares, but he radiated power. He lounged on his throne of fused human bones, looking lithe, graceful, and dangerous as a panther. I immediately felt like he should be giving the orders. He knew more than I did. He should be my master. Then I told myself, snap out of it. Hades' aura was affecting me just as Ares had. The Lord of the Dead resembled pictures I'd seen of Adolf Hitler or Napoleon, or the terrorist leaders who direct suicide bombers. Hades had the same intense eyes, the same kind of mesmerizing, evil charisma. You are brave to come here, son of Poseidon, he said in an oily voice. After what you have done to me, very brave indeed. Or perhaps you are very foolish. Numbness crept into my joints, tempting me to lie down and take a little nap at Hades' feet. Curl up here and sleep forever. I fought the feeling and stepped forward. I knew what I had to say. Lord and Uncle, I came with 2 requests. Hades raised an eyebrow. When he sat forward in his throne, shadowy faces appeared in the folds of his black robes, faces of torment, as if the garments were stitched of trapped souls from the fields of punishment, trying to get out. The ADHD part of me wondered, off task, whether the rest of his clothes were made the same way. What horrible things would you have to do in your life to get woven into Hades' underwear? Only 2 requests? Hades said. Arrogant child, as if you had not already taken enough. Speak then. It amuses me not to strike you dead. Yet. I swallowed. This is going about as well as I feared. I glanced at the empty, smaller thrones next to Hades. It was shaped like a black flower and gilded with gold. I wished Queen Persephone were here. I recalled something in the myths about how she could calm her husband's moods, but it was summer, of course. Persephone would be above in the world of the light with her mother, the goddess of agriculture, Demeter. Her visits were not the tilt of the planet create the seasons. Annabeth cleared her throat. Her finger prodded me in the back. Lord Hades, I said. Look, sir, there can't be a war among the gods. It would be bad. Really bad, Grover added helpfully. Continue here tomorrow. Great listening. I can't wait to see what happens with Hades.